Han Sen's black smoke was doused and his armor shattered. He was sent flying. While Han Sen was in the air, his entire body and Rex Spike were consumed by a wailing tornado. He became an ice cube, and when he fell back down to the ground, he was like an iceberg in the sea of sand. The little angel caught up from behind, swung her greatsword, and whacked the fairy down into the black sand. Blood now gushed from her exposed wounds. The fairy had reached the end of its tether, and it would soon die. It had no hope of competing against the little angel anymore. It was drained of strength and its body was covered in exposed wounds that gushed blood. The little angel's eyes flashed, and she waved her white wings. But as she flew towards the fairy, a firework of frost and ice rocketed into the air and exploded. The dazzling display brought with it an abundance of snowflakes. Han Sen cleaved his way through the ice that encased him. His chest was all bloody and cut, even his ribcage was exposed. Kill her. Han Sen was now infuriated, and he did not care for the wound on his chest. He summoned his wings to give the fairy chase and vowed to the heavens above that he'd kill her. The fairy's escape was extremely quick, and even the little angel had great difficulty catching up to her. But quite abruptly, the fairy slowed down. It seemed as if her burst of speed had chugged and come to an end, due to a complete exhaustion of her own strength. Now, even slower than usual, it fluttered away from the battle. Han Sen and the little angel followed the fairy to the Black Mountain, and watched it retreat into the mouth of the cave the scorpion had once dug. Together, they followed the fairy inside. Hastily, the tiny menace whizzed her way through the bamboo forest in a bid to reach the icy domain where they had first discovered it. Han Sen wasn't sure why it would retreat there, but he knew he would have to finish it off soon. He commanded the little angel to venture ahead and close the distance the fairy was currently gaining on them. But the fairy had now gained a fair lead, and even if they went at their top speed, it'd be difficult for them to catch up anytime soon. The fairy smacked the 1-foot-thick ice that pained the water and shattered it. Without lingering, it quickly dove into the icy cauldron. The little angel didn't hesitate to follow her in, and plunged in after her. To her surprise, the lake itself was shallow, only a few meters deep at the most. Han Sen caught up and stood by the water's edge. The lake was pure and he could see what occurred below with startling clarity. Han Sen watched the little angel swing her greatsword beneath the water, but it seemed as if something was repelling the completion of her strikes, and she was unable to deal damage to the heavily injured fairy. When Han Sen looked closer, he noticed the fairy was hiding inside a fist-sized scallop shell. The scallop shell was translucent like refined ice, and you would only notice its presence if you peered closely. As the fairy lay inside the scallop shell, it was naked and bleeding heavily. Its butterfly-like wings fluttered weakly, and it looked scared by the menacing angel that lusted for its blood. Han Sen observed the little angel deliver a few more strikes, all to no avail. Then, he commanded her to pick up the entire scallop shell from the lake. The scallop shell felt cold when Han Sen held it in his hand. It was unlike any other shell he had ever held before. It looked as if it had been carved from some icy jade, yet it looked natural and it didn't seem to have been crafted by anyone. Is this gear that was created by the fairy? As Han Sen mulled the question, he examined the dying fairy, which appeared to be in shock. But Han Sen came to the conclusion that this assumption was incorrect. The fairy was born from a narcissus, so it hadn't had the opportunity to create gear for itself yet. After all, even if it could make gear, why would it create a scallop shell? Han Sen placed the scallop shell on the ground and bid for the little angel to smack it a few more times. But it was incredibly durable, and try as she might, she could not break it open. The repeated strikes only drew thin white marks across its previously untarnished exterior. Han Sen then sought to try out his toxic dragon drill on it, but that proved futile. After that strike, all that remained on the shell was a little white dot. He tried everything at his disposal, but still, he could not crack the shell open. With a great depression, his heart sunk with the thought, taking on this fairy was no small feat. Will this whole thing result in failure, all due to its hiding? But quickly, Han Sen noticed something was amiss. The fairy should have been happy at Han Sen's inability to get at it. But instead, it looked shocked, and worse than ever. Han Sen picked up the scallop once more and noticed something wrong with it. The scallop was not empty, as its interior was full of a transparent liquid. Han Sen at first believed it to be water from the lake, but upon closer inspection, realized it wasn't. The liquid was corrosive, and it was rotting the fairy's wounds. It wasn't healing, and instead, it was doing much worse. Han Sen smiled at this revelation. Just as he believed, the scallop shell was indeed not a gear created by the fairy. Han Sen then assumed the scallop shell belonged to another creature, but somehow it had ended up at the bottom of the lake. Searching for safety, the fairy tried to use it as a hiding spot. She most likely did not realize the oozy mucus inside the shell would deteriorate her wounds into an even worse state. Perhaps she had hidden inside the shell before, but the liquid couldn't do anything to her fair and undamaged body. Maybe that was why she thought it a great idea to hide inside and jovially prevent Han-sen from finishing her off. But the fairy did not expect the previously harmless liquid to begin finishing her off. She was trapped inside, all the while her wounds eroded. "Let's see you get out of this one," Han-sen calmly mocked the fairy, but did not believe she would submit to the fate of a grisly corrosion inside the shell without attempting one last daring escape. He allowed the little angel to hold onto the scallop shell for him as they departed the bamboo forest and returned to the Yellowstone city. There was no fear of the fairy daring an escape, as her death was secured no matter what she attempted. But it did look like it was going to be a while before it died, and judging from the fairy's face, it wasn't yet ready to run off, if it ever would be. The fairy was already badly injured, and it was only going to get worse the longer it remained inside. After resolving the entire debacle with the fairy, Han-sen no longer wanted to linger in the solitary shelter. He hadn't found out why there was a super spirit chained up in the spirit hall, but he ultimately decided it had nothing to do with him and didn't mind leaving the mystery unresolved. After preparing his supplies, he rallied Ju Yume and Little Orange to accompany him in a journey across the desert sands and away from the Yellowstone city. The fairy was still hanging on inside the scallop shell as her wounds got worse and worse. Han-sen figured she wouldn't survive another 10 days, and by then, she'd be nothing but bones. "Do you actually know the way out of here?" Ju Yume asked from atop Little Orange as the unceasing sun bore down on her. "No," Han-sen quickly replied. He had selected a direction and decided to stick to it, but he had no defined path that would lead him out of the Black Desert. Ju Yume thought about starting an argument with Han-sen, and she raised her lips to do so. But right before the words left her lips, the sound of a bird screeching pierced their eardrums. Far across the sweltering dunes of the Black Desert, a black-flamed phoenix-like bird was flying. Han-sen was taken aback at the sight of the black flame phoenix soaring across the horizon. Its speed was incredible, and it disappeared from sight within the blink of an eye. A heat wave descended from the sky and almost cooked Han-sen's body hair. Fortunately, the phoenix did not seem to be interested in them. It simply flew on its own accord and disappeared. That being said, it seemed to be going in the direction Han-sen had selected for his own journey. "Why don't we switch course and choose a different direction to go in? Ill fortune is the only thing that can come from a close encounter with such a creature," Ju Yume suggested with worry. Before they caught sight of the bird, Ju Yume noticed her Little Orange was a little on edge. Han-sen shook his head, however. "We have to go this way." If he wanted to cross the Black Desert, he had to continue in the direction he was going. And the phoenix-like bird did not seem interested in them, anyway. It was most likely just passing by. After another 2 days of travel, it occurred to Han-sen that they had not again seen the bird, whereas Ju Yume forgot about the sighting entirely. After dark, Han-sen erected a tent so he could rest for the night and move on the morrow. "How come you only ever erect one tent for yourself? Where do you expect me to sleep, huh?" Ju Yume's black eyes were opened wide. "If you don't fancy sleeping outside in the rough, then come inside and sleep with me." Han-sen was already crawling into the tent as he spoke. "You, what a gentleman," Ju Yume said sarcastically. She peered into the darkness of the desert all around them, then crawled inside after Han-sen. It was a simple tent, and it was not one you could stand up in. The Silver Fox and Little Orange were already inside and had gotten all snug. Lying down, Ju Yume could feel Han-sen's body warmth. "I'm warning you, don't get any funny ideas," Ju Yume told Han-sen, with the eyes of a mad woman. "Do not worry, I lacked the gentle love of a mother when I was young." Han-sen did not even look at Ju Yume while he spoke. Instead, his eyes were fixed on a book he had just pulled out from his pack. "What is that supposed to mean?" Ju Yume froze, unable to understand what Han-sen meant by that. "Nothing, I'm just complimenting the fact that you are young and small," Han-sen casually said. "You have good taste, but no matter how pretty I am, you can't." Ju Yume was a little shy, and she spoke while looking down. But she only spoke half of her sentence when she glanced at her breasts, which were like 2 little hills upon her chest. Her face quickly flushed red and she said, "You are the one who is small." Han-sen put down the book and took his shirt off. This shocked Ju Yume, and she quickly scrambled away in panic. She used her arms to shield and cover her body, asking with distress, "What do you want?" Han-sen smiled and patted the muscles that composed his chest and said, "They may not be big, but they're bigger than yours." Ju Yume couldn't help but take a look. She was impressed by the sight, and they were indeed wide and thick. They weren't particularly outstanding, but they had delicate curves that made them attractive to look at. And Han-sen had a six-pack that was like jade, and the silky smooth white skin that drove women crazy. Seeing this, Ju Yume almost started drooling. Furthermore, she began to develop the urge to touch them. Clean the saliva from your lips and go to sleep. You shouldn't disturb me during the night. Han-sen pushed Ju Yume's head away as her body drew nearer to him. Then, he tucked himself into his sleeping bag. Ju Yume wanted to fight back, but she instead looked down once more and observed her own modest chest. She thought about Han-sen's thick and wide chest, where the muscles locked and curved around each other impeccably. She noticed she had indeed lost this round before it even began, and she had no ammunition to return fire on this particular subject. Ju Yume continued thinking about his body as she eyed him, and then her mind ventured further in her visions of the man. She recalled how powerful he was, and how he so fearlessly challenged the spirit. He also took care of the fairy and scorpion. It looked like she was in love. But then her heart sunk at another image that popped up in her mind, and that was the ring that adorned his finger. She sighed and said to herself, "Why are the good ones always taken?" "What did you say?" Han-sen frowned and turned to look at Ju Yume. Ju Yume's face became red again. She had gotten so excited, she never expected she'd end up speaking her thoughts aloud. As Ju Yume panicked, Han-sen turned around completely. Han-sen's body was still so close, and then, he covered her mouth with his hand. He climbed on top of her. "I can't compete. How am I supposed to resist a man like this? I am just a weak and defenseless woman. There is no way I can resist his strength." Ju Yume managed to find herself an excuse, which quickly put her at ease. Seeing Han-sen's body above her, she closed her eyes and continued thinking, "There is no one else here. What is he holding my mouth for? Even if I scream, no one could possibly come to my aid. I might moan and groan in delight, but there's no reason for me to scream." Ju Yume's heart was still pumping wildly, but after a while, her expectations weren't coming to pass. She felt strange, and then she peeked open her eyes a little. With one hand still covering her mouth, Han-sen had unzipped the tent and taken a peek outside. Ju Yume's face was now burning and her neck was getting hot. She wanted to dig a hole and hide. Han-sen looked outside and noticed a halo that sat upon the black desert in the distance. A lone luminescent dandelion brushed by the tent, carried by the gentle breeze. Han-sen initially thought it was some special sort of creature that had drawn near, and although it wasn't, he still eyed it with a modicum of concern. It was a surprise to see the bevy of lights as little more than flowers, and it was a most curious phenomenon. When they had pitched the tent that evening, none of the flowers were around. Now, across every portion of the black desert that was visible, dandelions sprouted. They were endless, and their pretty lights spread out in each direction like a galaxy of stars. When the wind blew, the galaxy moved. It was a beautiful sight to behold. Ju Yume, who had managed to regain her composure, moved nearer to Han-sen. After taking a peek at what had taken hold of his attention, her eyes opened wide like the stars themselves. Ju Yume tried to pull Han-sen's hand away from her mouth, but he had a firm grip. Just as she was about to lose her temper, she heard a noise in the distance. It was like the sound of a heavy animal's footstep. Han-sen looked further into the distance and saw, beneath the night sky, a creature coming towards them. It shined like a beacon of holy light. It walked alongside the dandelions that were below and afloat, like a glorious ship through the net of stars, soaring through the galaxy. Ju Yume could see the luminous creature now, as well. She was surprised to see it was a white rhino. Its body was shaped like a little hill, and with every step it made, the ground of the desert shook. The silver fox and little orange snuggled together in the corner of the tent, quiet as mice. They too were terrified of the white rhino that had drawn near. Boom! A foot came down like a piston on the sand directly behind Han-sen's tent, avoiding them. The luminous dandelions continued their spiraling as the campsite vibrated with the force. Boom! Boom! The rhino did not decelerate, and it continued in the direction it had been going. The four pillars crossed over the tent, missing the guy ropes by inches. The craters left behind by the creature's feet now decorated the campgrounds. Ju Yume's heart almost leapt out of her chest. Fortunately, the white rhino did not pay heed to the presence of a tent as it went onwards. Along with the gorgeous, luminescent dandelions, it slowly trailed off out of sight behind them. When the white rhino was gone from their vision, the presence of the glowing dandelions dimmed, too. They quit shining and melted into the desert like snowfall. Not a trace of them was left behind. During the daytime, they encountered the black flame phoenix, and now they had been witnesses to the existence of a white rhino that glowed with a holy light. Both of these creatures had been traveling in the direction Han-sen had picked. He wondered if something awaited them where they were headed. Han-sen heard a clapping noise, and he turned around to see Zhu Yume slapping her cheeks. He laughed and said, "Why are you hitting yourself? There is a mosquito." Zhu Yume continued to wave her hands around, all to no avail. Han-sen took a look and saw a small mosquito flying around her. It was pretty quick and surprisingly agile. No matter how much she tried to hit it, the mosquito perfectly evaded every attack. Han-sen clapped his hands and killed the mosquito in one hit. Mutant creature bloodlust mosquito killed. No beast soul gained. Eat the flesh of the mutant creature bloodlust mosquito to gain 0 to 10 Geno points randomly. Han-sen was incredibly surprised, having not suspected the small mosquito to be a mutant creature. A few more mosquitoes showed up, which Han-sen promptly killed. After that, even more showed up. They flew around madly, producing an infuriating sound. Han-sen attacks were quick as lightning, and he was killing mosquitoes left, right, and center. They were ordinary class creatures this time, as well as many mutant class variants. After killing all of them, Han-sen noticed Zhu Yume looked frozen. She was staring at something ahead of them with an agape jaw. Her face was distorted into one of fright, as if she had seen something most wretched. "What's wrong with you?" Han-sen frowned. "Momo mosquito." Zhu Yume raised her finger, pointing ahead of them. With a trembling voice, she called out what made her look so scared. "What? They're just mosquitoes. There is no need to be afraid. I can kill them all." Han-sen then turned to look in the direction she pointed towards and noticed a giant crack in the desert sands. From it, swarms of the mosquitoes emerged like a geyser. "What are you waiting for? Run!" Han-sen shouted. The bloodlust mosquitoes conquered the skies like a sandstorm, and they even struck fear into the silver fox and little orange. Together, those two scrambled to get away. If it was just a small number of mosquitoes, even at mutant class, there was nothing to be afraid of. But a countless horde such as that would be too much. Han-sen had the appropriate super armor to block the attacks, but Zhu Yume would be killed in an instant. The silver lightning crackled across the silver fox's fur, and he emitted a number of bolts to zap those that sought to overwhelm him. Little Orange's body was jumping up and down to kill many, but a fair number of the mosquitoes had already latched onto it. Without reprieve, the hungry insects drank deep of its blood. Han-sen was well and truly shocked. He didn't expect the mosquitoes to be able to drink the blood of a super creature, and that meant Little Orange and the silver fox were in as much danger as they were. Although only female mosquitoes could drink blood, their numbers were still scary enough to place them all in serious danger. Han-sen's face changed, and he commanded the little angel to clear a path for them. Then, he sped up to attempt an escape. But the mosquitoes were like a sandstorm, and more were coming to engulf them. The silver fox was doing better than all of them. However, the electricity on his body worked like a shield, and it prevented the mosquitoes from landing on him. But for the others, they were slowly being swarmed by the fiends. Numerous mosquitoes were starting to land on them, especially Zhu Yume. Within seconds, Zhu Yume's body was host to a large number of lumps. Sucking her blood was fine, but the lumps were driving her insane. They were itchy, and each of her 10 fingers went into overdrive, scratching as fiercely as she could. She was doing it so much, blood was being drawn to the surface. And as people say, the more you scratch, the itchier it gets. While Han-sen contemplated his next move, he suddenly saw a white fog approaching. When the mosquitoes came into contact with it, they fell to the ground like hard rain. Looking towards the little angel, he saw her holding the scallop shell in her hand. It was half open, and from the inside, the fairy was active. It unleashed a gust of frosty air. The temperature around them dropped in a snap. The mosquitoes were clearly weak to the cold, and upon coming into contact with the frost, were stunned and frozen. In fear of the cold, the swarm of mosquitoes now seemed hesitant to continue their pursuit. Han-sen never expected the fairy to possess such a human quality, to forgive past grievances and be willing to trade her own life for the safety of him and his companions. Han-sen took the scallop shell out of Little Angel's hands. The fairy was still quite afraid, and she only opened the shell a small amount in order to expel the frosty air. The fairy clasped her hands together before her face, as if she was praying to Han-sen. The look in her eyes suggested she was begging Han-sen to let her go. But this did not align with Han-sen's own desire. It was difficult to get a second-generation super creature, and there was a life Geno essence sitting right in front of him. Perhaps even a beast soul, too. "If I let you go, will you come back for vengeance?" Han-sen asked, looking at the fairy. The fairy behaved as if she understood what Han-sen said to her, and she shook her head like mad. "Really?" Han-sen asked, with a deeper tone of voice this time. The fairy continued to shake her head, and it seemed as if she was being sincere. "All right, then. Come on out. Let's forget about what happened in the past." but don't even think about doing it again." The fairy seemed to be fairly intelligent, and after he finished talking, she popped the lid of the shell open and flew out. She then landed on the palm of Han Sen's hand. Han Sen held the fairy there, and in his heart, he grinned. The smile of a devil adorned his lips, and he thought to himself, "Oh, little fairy, you are in my hands, and now I am going to kill you." Han Sen never thought the previously vengeful, maniacal fairy would be so easy to trick. She seemed to believe what he said without question, and now she had allowed him to hold her. Little did she know, he was planning to bring a swift end to their truce. The fairy remained off guard, allowing herself to be held by Han Sen. She seemed oblivious to Han Sen's murderous gaze. Han Sen then, unbeknownst to anyone else, secretly channeled the Sonic and Thunder elements. Soon, he'd cast Sonic Thunder Punch and utterly annihilate the fairy once and for all. But seeing the defenseless fairy clench his fingers tight, giving him poor puppy dog eyes, Han Sen found himself unable to do it. The fairy seemed so human, and she did her best to help out against the mosquitoes. Now that she was in Han Sen's hand, he found himself unable to kill something that was utterly defenseless. "Are you going to listen to me in the future?" Han Sen held the fairy in his hand, and his gaze was as sharp as a blade. The fairy nodded. She held on to Han Sen's fingers and kissed them with her red lips. Then she looked at him again with pitiable eyes. "If you say so, I will believe you once. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Do not disappoint me, or else I won't let you go." Han Sen sighed, relaxed his hands and let the fairy sit down in his palms. "Are you sure?" Inside the Angel Gene office, Zhao 7th spoke to Zhao Lion. "It has already been confirmed. Han Sen's mother, Luo Lan, is the sole granddaughter of Luo Haiding. The Jai family have Luo Haiding's support," Zhao Lion said in return. Zhao 7th sternly frowned and asked, "Has the Jai family done anything yet?" "They haven't done anything particularly big. But according to the intel provided by Old Kai, some of the demigods of the Jai family are on their way to the Godslayer shelter," Zhao Lion replied. "They are lucky bastards. I cannot believe they have a connection with Luo Haiding. If this strengthens, they won't have to rely on us as much. If the Jai family wants to use Luo Haiding's power to be rid us, and the support we have already been providing, I won't allow it. Although Luo Haiding is powerful, being a demigod and all, strength matters not. He is alone where he is, and he cannot return to the second shelter. Push on with the Angel Gene 4th stage tests a little quicker. They may prove useful in the near future. The 4th stage tests require a lot of Shura royal blood. And we also need Dan Copper stars." Zhao Lion wanted to continue, but his words hesitated to come out. Zhao 7th frowned and said, "Give it to them. Angel Gene is our crowning accomplishment, and a Dan Copper star is nothing. Once we have established a presence and can support ourselves in the 4th shelter, that is when our family will truly begin to shine." "Yes," Zhao Lion agreed. Then, he turned around and exited Zhao 7th's office. "I will let these old men know that their time is up. The advancement of humanity, genetics and all, lies in technology." Zhao 7th's eyes shone with light. The group of travelers traversed the Black Desert for another 2 weeks. Just as Han Sen had almost forgotten about all the strange occurrences that had happened along the way, he stumbled across an oasis. "No way, coconut trees here." Han Sen, after seeing the oasis, looked a little strange. Oases weren't entirely strange, but the abundance of coconut trees was. Each tree was decorated with a number of basketball-sized coconuts that looked absolutely delicious. This was a harsh desert, and yet, why would seaside-grown coconut trees be growing here? Their sheer number was incredible, too. The water was incredibly salty, just like seawater. Ignoring her reaction, Han Sen looked towards the center of the lake. There, a small island rested. It was no bigger than a football field, and at its center was a giant coconut tree. The coconut tree looked different than the rest. Not only was it taller, but its trunk was like white jade. The coconuts up high were different as well. They were like black, giant metal balls. Han Sen took a closer look. The giant, white jade coconut tree was bearing 3 coconuts, and they were each approximately the size of a yoga ball. Their darkness accentuated their sense of weight, too. As Han Sen observed the white jade coconut tree, the waters of the lake shifted. Something huge arose from the water, and a pair of wheel-like eyes ascended to the sky and looked down on Han Sen and Zhu Yume. A white rhino exited the lake. The water level dropped significantly as it emerged. "Isn't that the white rhino we saw a while back?" Han Sen was taken aback. The white rhino, thankfully, did not seem too interested in their presence. After emerging from the waters of the lake, it approached the island at its center and gobbled up one of the black metal coconuts. As the rhino chewed it, a sweet fragrance tickled Han Sen's nose. The entirety of the coconut forest was quickly overwhelmed by the smell. The silver fox and little orange both gulped. The fairy could not help but fly over there in a rush, and within a second, her small body quickly managed to pierce and drill through the coconut into its interior. Han-sen was alarmed, thinking she might end up provoking the white rhino and inciting its wrath. Surprisingly, the white rhino did not attack the fairy, and kept happily munching its own coconut. Seeing how passive the rhino appeared, the silver fox and little orange quickly jumped into the lake and swam to the island at its center. The silver fox leapt up towards the coconut the fairy was in and drank the milk that was dripping from the bore hole. Little orange meowed from down below and tried to jump up and take a bite of the third coconut. It managed to reach, but it could not pierce the coconut's shell or remove it from the tree. Han-sen was surprised at the sight. He firmly acknowledged how different and special those coconuts really were, especially considering that not even juvenile second-generation super creatures could break them open with their teeth. It looked like only adults were able to open them up, like the fairy. But what happened next blew the socks off Han-sen and Ju Yume. The white rhino opened its mouth and bit the coconut little orange was struggling to get for itself. It did not eat the coconut, it merely cracked the shell open and placed it down on the ground for little orange to eat. With glee, little orange pounced upon the coconut and finished opening it up for itself, and with a ravenous tongue, began lapping up the milk inside. Han-sen had never seen something like this before, a creature with such a good temper. The white rhino proceeded to lie down beside them on the aisle, watching the silver fox and little orange drink the coconut juice to their heart's content. It didn't seem to have a single nasty bone in its body, and it was so calm. Han-sen watched them all eat the coconuts and suddenly developed the desire to partake in the treat they were helping themselves to. With haste, he ran over to join them. Let's hope the white rhino isn't racist. Han-sen ran over to the island, all the while observing the white rhino for any change in temper. Fortunately, as he stepped onto the island, the white rhino did not move. It continued to lie where it was, utterly serene. Not wasting any time, he threw his arms around the coconut to drink as much as he could. Little Orange's tongue was wagging quickly, and its feet were subtly trying to push Han-sen away. But Han-sen was not willing to budge one minor inch. He continued to grip the coconut firmly and carried on drinking as best he could. Ju Yume remained where she was, however. She had never before seen someone so obscene, and so willing to fight against another animal for food. Save me some, save me some. But when she resolved to get some for herself and ran over to the island, she noticed there was no space left for her. She could only circle them and wait for an opening. With a great push, she knocked Han-sen away and found a place for herself on the coconut. But it was too late. Poking her head inside, she noticed Han-sen and Little Orange had consumed every last drop of the juice, leaving nothing for her. Falling down to the ground, Han-sen's belly was frighteningly large. He couldn't even straighten his back or stand up to drink some more, had there been any left. A cool energy began to whirl inside his stomach, and it blended with the rest of his body. His entire body felt so cool. It was like his cells had been injected with refreshing spring water. The white rhino was on the island, watching the entire scene unfold. After the silver fox and the fairy finished their coconut juice, however, it stood up and munched on the shell. They were both unafraid of the rhino, and the silver fox decided to climb aboard. It stood upon one of its horns and gazed all around. The fairy soon followed, and she landed on the tip of the horn. There, she curiously observed the rhino. The rhino did not look mad at all, and all it did was squint while looking at them. That rhino is so cute, Ju Yume said, despite being prone to calling everything cute. As she spoke, she tried to hug one of the rhino's leg, but she was little more than an ant when compared to the size of the rhino. Han-sen eyed this rhino with curiosity, as it was the first time he had ever encountered another creature that was so docile and passive. He used his Dongshuan Sutra to take a look at the rhino's energy flow. The life force was frighteningly powerful, and it had the breadth of an ocean. The energy swirled with a slow passion, and it looked holy and pure. What is this super creature? The life force is too much to be considered one, surely. Han-sen was surprised at what he was seeing. That night, the rhino finally moved. It got up and began walking away from the island. It seemed to be leaving the oasis. Han-sen quickly packed up his stuff, grabbed Ju Yume, and flew to the rhino's back. The silver fox and Little Orange climbed aboard too, and they were soon all riding the rhino's back, setting out into the black desert once more. Under the serene, silver moonlight, the luminous dandelions returned as well. As if they were aboard a starfaring ship, it was like the rhino was traversing a galaxy. It's so beautiful. Ju Yume's eyes sparkled like the stars themselves. Han-sen observed the white rhino as it went, and noticed the life force of the rhino was overflowing. It was this overflow of energy that manifested itself as the dandelions. The direction the white rhino traveled was the direction Han Sen himself had been moving all this time. It wasn't easy finding a powerful super creature as tame as this, given that Han Sen didn't mind riding it for as long as he could. The rhino's body was awash with a holy light. The sun and rain couldn't penetrate its protective shield, and even the terrible sandstorms weren't an issue. Every damaging element acted as if it were avoiding the rhino. The white rhino walked for another 6 whole days before stopping, and it was a pillar-like construct that stopped its travel. Upon closer observation, Han Sen noticed that it was in fact a giant black cactus. It was a few hundred meters tall, massive, and adorned with a white flower at its top. Han Sen stood on top of the rhino's head, and when he saw the cactus, his face looked queer. From the way he saw it, the cactus was shaped like a man's penis. But in this world, nobody's penis could reach a size such as that. As Han Sen was lost in thought observing the cactus, a bird cawed. A black flame bird was high above, circling the thorny construct. It was the same bird they had seen quite some time ago. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss the next chapter.